So you mentioned that you very much believe in the First Amendment and freedom of speech. Um, when I told some of my fellow philosophy students and friends that I was going to be speaking to you, they were incredibly interested in the Dissident Philosophers Project. Um, and I know that you part of that. You wrote an essay for the project or the book, and so I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about why you got involved with that project and what the overall purpose of it is. As I'm sure many of people watching, friends that I know, and just me personally, am incredibly interested to hear about it.
Yeah, well, the idea of that anthology was that there are a number of us across the country, philosophers across the country, who think of ourselves as conservative in one way or another, or who just don't see ourselves as agreeing with sort of the multicultural, cosmopolitan, progressive themes that are often embraced by most of our colleagues in higher education. And so the original idea of that anthology, it was this, is that each of us was tasked with just kind of giving an autobiography of, how did you end up thinking this way, where you're thinking things that are kind of at odds with so many of your other colleagues. And so, each of us kind of had our own idiosyncratic paths that we took to believing what we do. And I think, therefore, all of us in that anthology ended up having very kind of different projects. It wasn't like there was one goal. I think more of the idea was just each of the people who contributed in that anthology were trying to sort of explain where they're coming from, or how they ended up thinking what they believe in a way that's at odds with a number of kind of the more progressive or left-leaning points of view. So there's not a single theme, I think, that ties all of those essays together. It was just an opportunity for all of us to explore our own unique paths to kind of our different versions of conservatism.
I mean, one of the things that I've noticed in recent years, or maybe this has been a trend for a while, but kind of people with um, dissident voices, let's say, or views that diverge from kind of the mainstream academia, particularly on the political spectrum, feel distraught with higher education and academia. Um, and I'm wondering if you think that is because, well, I guess, what is your diagnosis of that cause? And do you think it has something to do with the fact that there is such an imbalance ideologically between like the way that professors think um, across the United States and in the world, and the professors view what they think is important, what they merit, what they view as politically important versus other people.
Yeah, now I want to stress, I don't think there's one answer to that question. I think different, dissident philosophers are going to have different ways of handling that kind of question. Um, I think for me, I think there were two kind of big things that made me feel less and less sort of happy, or more, your language, as you said, more distraught. I think, and that's first of all what I noticed happening in my classrooms, is that I found it harder and harder and harder to just get my students to debate one another, just to get them to entertain, just for the sake of argument. Like, hey, take a position that I know you don't agree with, but just take that position and let's just have fun having a disagreement about it and just see where our debate goes. And what I noticed is that students got less and less comfortable with having debates and disagreements with one another in the classroom setting where their peers could see them that way. And so, and that sort of distresses me and makes me distraught, because I think part of the wonderful thing about philosophy is, you have a chance to engage in all of these incredibly interesting disagreements and famous debates about all these different issues. And so that's maybe the first let me put it this way, the repertoire of our students, it seemed like they hadn't been flexing their disagreement muscles at all. And so that disagreeing with other people was this new experience that they had never had. And, so that's sort of the first thing that made me feel sort of less and less satisfied with what's going on in higher education, is just it seemed to be less a place where disagreement was happening. But then I think the second thing, and this is related to it, is that, in our country, we've for a long time been having incredibly interesting and profound debates about very deep and important things. Like, what is a country? Now, like, just to pick one out, what does it mean to be a citizen of America? Let alone questions about, you pick it. When does human life begin in the abortion debate? Or should we pick whatever great and important debates you want, where there are, on both sides of those debates, there are incredibly intelligent, well-meaning people, who want to be part of the debate. And I think it's pretty clear that we as a country have these huge, big debates. And so the thing that was making me distraught is it seemed like higher education was less, it was rarely the case that those debates were taking place on college campuses and on university campuses. And instead, what was happening is higher education is just grooming people to be on one side of those debates. And I think in the long term, that's a dangerous thing for higher education to do, because it ends up making it look like higher education is partisan. And it's a recipe for people coming along and saying, what's the point of higher education if the big debates we're having as a country, and maybe even as a civilization, aren't being registered there in any deep and important way? So, I think that's the thing that made me feel more distraught, is that the big, important debates that we're having as a country aren't showing up here on college campuses. They're taking place outside of higher education. And now, like, on Substack, like on podcasts, in independent media, like, that's where all the intellectual fervor and big debates are being taken out. And so I think for me personally, those were the two big things. There's the more typical things about cancel culture and wokeness and all of that, but that really, to me, isn't the main thing going on. To me, the idea is that disagreement muscles aren't being flexed, and ultimately we weren't. University and colleges, campuses aren't places where you're hearing the best and deepest versions of the big debates that we're having as a country.
Last question. What is your diagnosis for the reason that these debates and disagreements, and people are afraid to disagree with each other in the classroom? What's your diagnosis for the reason that's happening?
I think there are lots of different reasons. I'm going to sound sophomoric, I think, if I just pick one and try to reduce it to some simple explanation. But I can tell you what my worry is.
Okay.
And that is that our society has become more oligarchic. Our society has become one in which to use the Aristotelian language, the elite few who are resource rich are now controlling decision making for all of society in a way that they hadn't before. And I do think, let's just entertain that thought for a minute. I could be wrong, of course, but if that is the case, I think a lot of students feel that their only shot of being successful is to make it into that upper class, is to make it into that elite group. And because they think that the stakes are so high to get into that group that controls so much, is that they're more and more hesitant to take risks that would put them at odds with their teachers, their peers, or in any way rock the boat, and that would jeopardize their shot into getting into those decision-making centers. Now, I don't want to. I don't want to sound too pessimistic there, and because part of this could just be our perception about the way things work, and it may not be the case that our country actually is working that way. But nonetheless, I do think there's something to that. I do think that elite decision making now is filtering down and is being pushed down in a way that is somewhat new. And I think that a lot of the student behavior is a response to that. So anyway, that's my kind of off the cuff quick answer to you. I don't know how satisfying that is, but I also want to stress I'm not 100% sure in that answer myself. I'm just entertaining that.
Understood. Well, I think that's a great place to close.